The restaurant closed at midnight, but Elara stayed until 2, sometimes 3 in the morning. The kitchen became hers when the last server locked the door, a cathedral of steel and flame where she communed with ingredients that never asked her to speak. Her hands moved through preparations with the fluency her voice had never possessed, chopping herbs into green constellations, reducing sauces until they held the essence of 100 whispered secrets. She had been born without sound. Not deaf, she heard everything. The sizzle of butter, the crack of eggs, the music other cooks played to fill their lonely shifts. But her own voice had never emerged, throat intact, but silent as a sealed tomb. The doctors called it selective mutism, evolved into something permanent, a psychological lock that had rusted shut in childhood. She called it nothing. It simply was, like having brown eyes or small hands. The city outside her kitchen window sprawled dark and glittering, a modern landscape of glass towers and old brownstones pressed together like mismatched teeth. She worked in the historic district where cobblestones still lined certain streets, where gas lamps had been retrofitted with electric bulbs to maintain atmosphere for tourists who came seeking the past. The restaurant itself occupied the ground floor of a building that had seen 2 centuries, its bones good brick and timber, its soul steeped in the accumulated breath of generations. Elara wiped down her station, the ritual as meditative as prayer. She was small, 28, with dark hair she kept severely bound and eyes that seemed too large for her face. Watching eyes, absorbing eyes, the kind that noticed when basil had been picked too early, or when someone at table 12 was dining alone for the first time after a divorce. She noticed everything. It was her compensation for silence. She had just hung her apron when she heard it. Footsteps in the dining room. Her spine straightened. The front door was locked. She was always certain of locks. Moving quietly, she retrieved a chef's knife from the magnetic strip, held it low and ready as her mentor had taught her during those first frightening months in New York. The dining room lay dark beyond the kitchen's swinging door. She pushed through. A man stood beside the window table, the one that overlooked the small courtyard garden. He stood utterly still, hands clasped behind his back, studying the empty restaurant as though it were a museum, and he a visitor who had arrived after hours. He wore a long black coat despite the mild autumn night, his profile sharp against the ambient light filtering through the glass. Elara's grip tightened on the knife. She moved into his line of sight deliberately, letting him see the blade, see her stance. Her free hand found her phone in her pocket. He turned. She had expected many things: aggression, intoxication, confusion. She had not expected such a face, pale as parchment, fine-boned, with eyes that seemed to hold depths of shadow, despite the way they caught what little light existed. His hair fell dark and straight to his shoulders. He might have been 30 or 300. Time had touched him ambiguously, lending him the quality of an old painting, something preserved beyond its natural span. "Forgive me," he said, and his voice carried an accent she couldn't place, something European but ancient. The words shaped carefully as though language itself required conscious effort. The door was not locked, as it happened. "I did not mean to frighten you." Elara pointed firmly toward the exit, then made a gesture she'd perfected over years. A clear, unmistakable indication that he needed to leave, now. He observed the knife, her expression, and something flickered across his features. Not fear, something closer to resignation. "You cannot speak." It wasn't a question. She frowned, uncertain how he'd determined that so quickly. "I noticed the kitchen through your window," he continued, taking no step toward her, respecting the distance she'd established. "The way you moved, the absolute silence of your work, no humming, no muttered curses when something spilled, no taste testing with vocal approval or disappointment. I have observed many kitchens across many years. Silence in them is rare." Elara lowered the knife slightly, though she kept it ready. She gestured again toward the door, more insistently. "I wonder," he said, "if you might consider a commission. I find myself in need of a very particular meal, and I believe you alone might prepare it correctly." She shook her head, pointed to the closed sign visible behind him. "I would pay exceptionally well." He drew a card from his coat pocket, placed it on the nearest table. "I am staying nearby, temporarily. I suffer from a condition that makes eating difficult." Most food turns to ash in my mouth. But I have learned that food prepared with certain intentions by certain hands can still provide sustenance. Not physical nourishment, perhaps, but something my condition requires nonetheless. The card lay white against dark wood. Elara didn't move toward it. "You think I'm mad," he observed. "Or dangerous? Both are reasonable assumptions, but I swear to you, I mean no harm. I am merely very old, very tired, and very hungry for something I cannot quite name. When I saw you working through that window tonight, I thought, perhaps after so long, here is someone who might understand." He moved toward the door then, smooth and unhurried. At the threshold, he paused. "My name is Lucian. I will come again tomorrow night after you close. If you are willing to consider my request, leave a light burning in the kitchen window. If not, I will trouble you no further." Then he was gone, door closing behind him with barely a sound. Elara stood alone in the empty restaurant, her heartbeat gradually slowing. She looked at the card on the table but didn't retrieve it. Instead, she returned to the kitchen, locked everything properly, and left through the back entrance as always. But that night, she dreamed of cold hands and warm soup, of someone who had forgotten the taste of salt, of kitchens in ancient keeps where fires burned low, and food was medicine for ailments that had no name. The next evening, she cooked as always, but her mind wandered between tasks. She kept seeing that face, that careful stillness, hearing that voice-shaped words like something precious and foreign. During service, she burned a reduction, the first time in months she'd made such an elementary mistake. "You okay, Elara?" Marcus, the head server, signed the question, his ASL fluid from years of working with her. She nodded, waved him off, remade the sauce perfectly. But she knew she wasn't okay. She was curious, which was perhaps more dangerous. After the last customer departed and the kitchen was clean, she stood at the window looking into the courtyard. The practical part of her mind said to leave, go home, forget the strange encounter. The other part, the part that had learned to speak through food, through the silent grammar of flavor and texture, wondered what it meant to lose the taste of the world. She lit a candle and placed it in the window. Then she waited. Lucian appeared at 2:15, as though he'd been watching from somewhere beyond sight. She'd left the back door unlocked. He entered quietly, removing his coat, revealing a white shirt that might have been fashionable in some earlier decade, perfectly maintained but subtly outdated. "Thank you," he said simply. Elara had set out paper and pen at the small staff table where they took breaks. She wrote quickly, her cursive neat. "What condition do you have? I need to understand to cook properly." He read it, then met her eyes. "A curse, if you believe in such things. 500 years ago, I was made immortal through means I did not choose. The transformation rendered me unable to properly consume food or drink, except blood. But blood alone is a cold diet. It sustains the body I inhabit but starves everything else. I have learned over centuries that intention matters. Food prepared with genuine care, genuine artistry, can sometimes reach past the physical curse to feed what remains of my humanity." She wrote, "You're saying you're a vampire. I am saying I am cursed with certain vampiric qualities, yes, though I have not taken human life for blood in over 3 centuries. There are ways to survive without killing, if one is willing to accept diminishment." Elara studied him. She'd read enough folklore, seen enough films to know the mythology, but those were stories. This was a man, or something shaped like a man, sitting at her staff table, speaking with perfect courtesy about his impossible nature. She wrote, "Why me? Because you transform ingredients into emotion. I watched you through that window for 3 nights before I dared enter. You were not merely cooking. You were translating silence into sustenance. Each dish you prepared carried an intention. Comfort for the couple at the corner table who held hands like it was the last time. Celebration for the party of 6 who'd come to mark a survival. Remembrance for the old man who ordered the same meal his wife once loved. You cooked as though food was conversation, as though it could say what words could not." Heat rose in her cheeks. She had not realized anyone could see that clearly. "What do you want me to make?" "Whatever you believe might reach me," Lucian said. "I will pay you $5,000 for the attempt. If it fails, the loss is mine alone." She wrote rapidly, "I don't want money. I want to know your story. The real one. If I'm cooking for your humanity, I need to understand what that means. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or pain. My story is long and not kind. I have time, and I've learned that the unkind stories are usually the true ones. They sat in that quiet kitchen while the city's remaining nightlife hummed distant and irrelevant. Lucian spoke in his careful, ancient way, and Elara listened with the intensity she brought to tasting a new spice, absorbing everything. He had been born in 1502, the third son of a minor nobleman in what was now the Czech Republic. Destined for the church, educated in theology and philosophy, fluent in Latin and Greek by 15. But his elder brothers died, plague, war, and suddenly he became heir to lands he'd never expected to manage. He married a woman chosen by his father, a political alliance that became, surprisingly, a genuine love. They had 2 daughters. Life was ordinary in the way all lives are miraculous when examined closely. Then came the creature who called herself Magdalena. She arrived at their estate claiming to be a distant cousin, traveling alone, which should have been the first warning. Beautiful, charming, educated beyond what was common for women of that era. His wife welcomed her, his daughters adored her, and Lucian, fool that he was, never suspected. She waited 6 months, he said, his voice dropping to something barely audible. Long enough to become family. Then, on the night of our harvest festival, she revealed herself. She slaughtered my household, servants, guards, guests. She made me watch as she killed my wife, my children, and when I begged for death, she gave me this instead. Elara's hand had moved to cover her mouth, though no sound came. She turned me vampire as punishment for some offense I never understood. Perhaps I had been kind when she expected cruelty, or cruel when she expected kindness. Her logic was not human. Then she bound me with a curse, that I would live forever, but slowly lose all capacity for human sensation. Taste first, then smell, then touch would fade, then sight, then hearing, until I existed as a consciousness trapped in an immortal shell, unable to die, unable to sense the world, locked in silent darkness for eternity. She said I would have 500 years to contemplate my sins, whatever she believed them to be. What sins? Elara wrote, her hand shaking slightly. I never knew. Perhaps merely existing was sin enough in her eyes. Or perhaps there is no reason. Cruelty often requires no justification. And the curse is working? I lost taste after the 1st century, smell after 200 years. Touch began fading 3 centuries ago. I can still feel pain, unfortunately, but pleasure is nearly gone. Textures mean little now. I perceive heat and cold as distant concepts. I see, but colors have been draining from the world for decades. In perhaps another 50 years, I will be blind, then deaf, then entombed in my own perpetual existence. Elara sat back, processing. She wrote carefully, "But you said food prepared with intention can help?" I discovered this by accident 200 years ago. A child in Vienna made me a cake for my birthday. She didn't know what I was, thought me merely a reclusive neighbor. She'd made it with such love, such pure desire to bring happiness. When I ate it out of politeness, I tasted honey. Just for a moment. The first taste in a century. Since then, I've searched for similar experiences. They're rare. Most food is prepared mechanically now. But sometimes, very occasionally, I find a cook who still understands alchemy. And you think I'm an alchemist? I think you speak in a language beyond words. I think you might reach what remains reachable in me. Elara set down her pen. Her mind was racing through possibilities, ingredients that carried meaning beyond mere flavor. Bread, which was communion and comfort. Honey, which was preservation and gold. Salt, which was purification and tears. Herbs that meant remembrance, forgiveness, hope. She stood, moved to her station, began pulling ingredients from the cooler and pantry. Lucian watched, silent, as she worked. She started with broth, chicken stock she'd made yesterday, rich and golden, carrying the essence of bones and thyme. To this, she added fresh thyme, which meant courage, rosemary for remembrance, a bay leaf for protection. She let them steep while she prepared the rest. Pasta made by hand, each sheet rolled thin enough to see through, cut into wide ribbons. She cooked them in the broth with pieces of tender chicken, the meat falling apart into soft threads. Into the final bowl, she added a drizzle of her best olive oil, a crack of pepper, a whisper of lemon zest, and, after a moment's thought, a single tear of honey. She carried it to him, placed it carefully on the table, offered him a spoon. Lucian looked at the bowl as though it held something holy or terrible. "You made this in 15 minutes. She wrote, "Some things don't need time. They need truth." He lifted the spoon. His hand trembled slightly. Whether from hope or fear, she couldn't tell. He tasted. For a long moment, nothing. His face remained impassive. Then his eyes closed. A sound escaped him, something between a sigh and a sob. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. "I taste it," he whispered. "Salt and gold and green growing things. I taste—" He stopped, unable to continue. Elara felt her own eyes prickling. She wrote, "What do you taste?" "Home," he said. "I taste home." He came every night after that. Elara began arriving at the restaurant earlier, staying later, experimenting with dishes that carried intention, like vessels carried water. She cooked her grandmother's recipes, the ones she'd learned as a child before the silence became permanent. She cooked with spices that meant love and sorrow and endurance. She made him chocolate that melted like forgiveness, bread that rose like hope, wine-soaked pears that tasted of autumn in lost kingdoms. And slowly, carefully, like someone coaxing a wild thing closer, she drew out his story in pieces. He had wandered for centuries, trying to outrun his curse. He'd been a soldier, a scholar, a hermit, a merchant. He'd watched empires rise and collapse, had seen the birth of new philosophies and the death of old gods. He'd loved twice more, carefully, secretly, but both times he'd had to leave before his nature was discovered, before his failure to age became suspicious. "The hardest part," he told her one night while she stirred risotto, "is the forgetting. Not that I forget. The curse leaves memory intact, perhaps as additional punishment, but that the world forgets. Everyone I've known is dust. Every place I've loved is change beyond recognition. I carry 5 centuries of ghosts, but I am ghost to no one, because there is no one left who remembers me as human." She set down her spoon and wrote, "I'll remember." He looked at her, something breaking across his expression. "You would become a ghost yourself then, haunted by the memory of a monster. You're not a monster. A monster wouldn't mourn. A monster wouldn't seek humanity in soup. I've done monstrous things. In the early years, when the bloodlust was strongest, I killed. Not innocents, I told myself. Criminals, soldiers, those who seemed to deserve death. But who was I to judge? What right did a creature like me have to determine who lived or died?" "You stopped," she wrote. "That matters." "Does it? Does redemption exist for those who are already damned?" She considered this, then wrote carefully, "Magdalena cursed you to lose your senses, to become trapped in darkness. But you're seeking light. You're seeking taste, touch, connection. That's not damnation. That's resistance. You're fighting the curse by trying to stay human. That's redemption." Lucian was quiet for a long time. Then, "You have a remarkable way of seeing things, Elara." She smiled, resumed stirring. The risotto needed attention. It was temperamental, demanding constant care, but when made properly it became silk and cream and the comfort of being tended to. 6 weeks into their arrangement, Elara realized she'd begun cooking for him with more than professional interest. She caught herself selecting ingredients he'd once mentioned enjoying, adjusting recipes to match stories he had told about meals from his mortal life. She stayed later than necessary, invented reasons to draw out their conversations. Her side conducted through written notes and expressive gestures, his through that careful ancient voice. She learned he could play piano beautifully, muscle memory outlasting sensation. She learned he'd been fluent in 17 languages, though most were dead now. She learned he'd once saved a village from cholera by applying medical knowledge they considered witchcraft, that he'd been run out of town for his trouble. She learned he was lonely in a way that made her own silence seem small by comparison. One night, she made him her mother's goulash, the recipe passed down through 4 generations, each woman adding her own variation. She made it with beef she'd selected herself from a butcher who raised cattle humanely, with paprika she'd imported from Hungary, with patience and attention and a growing ache she couldn't quite name. Lucian ate slowly, savoring each bite with the focus of someone for whom taste had become miracle. "This is extraordinary," he said. "Not just the flavor, though that is remarkable, but the weight of it. I can taste generations. I can taste hands kneading dough in different centuries, women singing while they cooked, children stealing bites from the pot. How is that possible?" She wrote, "Because that's what food is. It's memory made physical. Every recipe is a story. Every meal is a conversation with the dead." You would have been a philosopher in another era. I'm a philosopher in this era. I just use different tools. He laughed, a sound she'd never heard from him before, rusty but genuine. Yes, you are." She wrote more hesitantly. "Can I ask something personal? You've fed me food that tastes like resurrection. I believe that earns personal questions. The touch. You said it's fading. Can you still feel—" She hesitated, unable to finish the sentence on paper. But he understood. "Some," he said quietly. "Not much. Temperature is nearly gone. Texture is vague. But pressure, yes. If someone touched my hand, I would know. I would feel the weight of it, if not the warmth." Before she could think better of it, Elara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. His skin was cool, not corpse cold as mythology suggested, but cooler than living flesh should be. His fingers were long, elegant, completely still beneath hers. "I feel it," he whispered. "I feel you." She didn't move, neither did he. They sat like that in the quiet kitchen, her small hand on his larger one, while the city outside continued its indifferent turning. Finally, reluctantly, she withdrew. She wrote, "I'm glad." But the world, as it has always done, intruded on private happiness. Elara arrived at the restaurant 3 nights later to find the front window shattered, the dining room in disarray, chairs overturned, tables scattered, and across the mirror behind the bar, painted in something dark, "Death to the corrupted." Her hands shook as she called the police. They came, took statements she wrote on her phone's notepad, assumed it was random vandalism or a robbery interrupted. They didn't see what she saw, the way the destruction seemed purposeful, the way nothing had actually been stolen, the way the message seemed aimed at something specific. She didn't open that night. Instead, she cleaned, replaced what could be replaced, and waited. Lucian came late, near 3 a.m. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the boarded window, the remaining evidence of violence. "They found me," he said flatly. Elara wrote quickly. "Who?" "Vampire hunters. They're rare now, but certain families maintain the traditions. They must have tracked me here. I've been careless, staying in one place too long, forming—" He stopped. "Attachments. You need to leave." "I will, tonight." "I'm sorry, Elara. I never meant to bring danger to your door." She stood, blocking his path, shaking her head violently. She wrote with angry, sharp strokes. "You can't just run forever. There has to be another way." "There isn't. This is how I've survived, by never staying, never connecting, never leaving traces. I broke my own rules for you, and now you're at risk. I won't allow that." "What about the curse? What about breaking it?" "The curse cannot be broken. Magdalena made certain of that before she vanished into whatever hell spawned her. I've searched for 5 centuries. There is no counterspell, no loophole, no redemption clause. There is only the slow fade into nothing." Elara grabbed his arm, forced him to look at her. She wrote, "You said food prepared with intention could reach you. What if we're thinking too small? What if it's not about taste? What if intention itself is the key?" "I don't understand." "Magdalena cursed you because of cruelty, right? Because of some perceived sin? Curses like that have logic, even if it's twisted. She wanted you to lose your humanity, to fade into isolation. But you've been fighting that. You've been seeking connection, seeking to remain human. What if the real curse breaking isn't about magic? What if it's about proving you're still capable of love?" Lucian stared at her. That's not how curses work." "How do you know? Have you ever tried?" "Tried what? Tried loving someone?" "Elara, I've loved and lost and loved again, and it changed nothing. But did they love you back? Did they know what you were? Did they choose you anyway?" His silence was answer enough. She wrote, her hand trembling now. "What if that's the key? What if someone has to choose you, knowing everything, and love you anyway? What if that's the intention that breaks curses, the intention to love something the world calls monster? You can't, he said, and his voice broke on the words. You can't be suggesting, I cook for you every night. I learn your stories. I make you meals that taste like home. Do you think I do this for money? Do you think I do this from pity? Elara, I do this because when you eat my food, you come alive. Because your smile is worth more than any voice I'll never have. Because you see me, really see me, in a way no one else ever has. Because I'm falling in love with a 500-year-old vampire, and I think you're falling in love with me too. The words sat between them, impossible and true. I am not falling, Lucian said softly. I have fallen. I fell the first night you made me soup and gave me hope. But Elara, I cannot give you what you deserve. I cannot grow old with you. I cannot give you children or daylight or a normal life. And if the curse continues, I will eventually lose even the ability to perceive you. I will be alive, but unable to sense your presence. Is that what you want? She wrote, I want you. Whatever time we have, whatever form it takes, I choose you. The hunters, we'll deal with them together. You don't understand what they're capable of. She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. Then she wrote, trust me. Trust this. Let me try. He looked at her for a long moment, his ancient eyes searching her young face, and she saw the exact instant he surrendered. What do you need? He asked. Everything. I need to know everything. Every detail of the curse. Every word Magdalena spoke. Every attempt you've made to break it. And then, I'm going to cook you one more meal. They worked through the night. Lucian described the curse in painful detail. The words Magdalena had used, the ritual she'd performed, the blood magic that had bound the spell to his transformed body. Elara listened, took notes, asked questions through writing that demonstrated a sharp, intuitive understanding of symbolic logic. She cursed you through your senses, Elara wrote. Sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. She took away your ability to experience the world, but she left your consciousness intact. Why? To ensure I suffered. If she'd taken awareness, it would have been mercy. Exactly, so consciousness matters. Awareness matters. You're meant to be awake for your own dissolution. But what if consciousness is also the key? What if being fully present, fully aware, with someone who loves you despite everything, creates a kind of magic stronger than her curse? That's remarkably optimistic for someone who can't speak. I've spent my life learning to communicate without words. I understand that some truths go deeper than language. Love is one of them. What are you planning? A meal. The most intentional meal I've ever made. Everything in it will be a statement. I know what you are. I know what you've done. I know what you're losing. And I choose you anyway. If curses work on symbolic logic, then so does counter magic. We'll make our own spell. And if it doesn't work, she smiled and wrote, then we'll have had one perfect meal together before you run. That's worth something too. She sent him away at dawn with instructions to return at sunset. She needed the day to prepare, to think, to cook with the kind of focus she usually reserved for wedding cakes and anniversary dinners. Marcus found her at noon, prepping vegetables with manic intensity. Elara, he signed, you okay? You haven't been yourself lately. She set down her knife, considered lying, then wrote, I'm in love with someone impossible. I'm trying to save him with soup. Marcus blinked. That's either really poetic or you need sleep. Maybe both. She laughed silently and returned to her work. The meal she planned was symphonic in its structure. 7 courses, each representing 1 century of his existence, each carrying specific meaning. First course, raw oysters with mignonette for his birth, for the salt of tears, for the sea that surrounded his original homeland. Second, a clear consommé with herbs, for his human life, for simplicity, for the family he'd loved and lost. Third, blood orange salad with fennel, for his transformation, for the bitterness of unwanted immortality, for the blood he'd been forced to consume. Fourth, roasted bone marrow with toast, for the century he'd spent hollow, for the richness he could no longer taste. Fifth, duck confit with cherries, for the lives he'd saved and taken, for the weight of 500 years of choices. Sixth, aged cheese with honeycomb, for the sweetness he'd rediscovered, for preservation, for the hope he'd maintained despite everything. Seventh, a simple butter cake with salt. For her, for them, for the future they might share if magic answered intention. She prepared everything with meticulous care, imbuing each element with purpose. She thought of him while she worked, his careful smile, his ancient sadness, the way he listened as though her silence was music. She poured every ounce of her love into the food, made each dish a prayer to gods she didn't believe in, because love itself was faith enough. At sunset, Lucian arrived to find the dining room transformed. She'd cleared away all evidence of the break-in, had set a single table with white linens and candles, had made the space into a sanctuary. "Elara," he breathed, "what is all this?" She handed him a card with 7 words written in her careful script. 7 courses for 500 years of longing. They sat. She served him, course by course, watching him taste each one with the reverence it deserved. She'd never seen him like this, fully present, completely focused, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with mortality. After the bone marrow, he wept. After the duck, he took her hand. By the cheese course, he was smiling through tears. And when she brought the cake, simple, perfect, carrying the essence of every tender thing she'd never been able to say aloud, he stood, pulled her close, and kissed her. It was gentle, chaste, but it carried 5 centuries of longing. All of it, focused on this one moment, this one silent woman who'd offered him redemption through soup and bread and impossible hope. When they parted, he touched her face with wonder. "I feel it," he whispered. "Your warmth. I can feel your warmth." Ilara's eyes widened. She grabbed paper, wrote frantically, "The curse? I don't know if—" He stopped, gripping her hand tighter. "Your hand. It's warm, not just pressure. I feel heat. I feel—" He laughed, the sound breaking. "I feel you." She wrote, "What else?" He looked at the table, at the remnants of their meal. "Colors. The candles are gold. The wine is red. Real red, not the faded gray I've seen for decades. And the taste. Elara, I can taste everything. Not just impressions. Actual flavor. The salt in the cake, the butter, the sweetness. It's—" He couldn't continue. She wrote with shaking hands. "It's working. The curse is breaking. How is this possible? Because love is its own magic. Because you spent 500 years trying to stay human, and I spent 28 learning to speak without words, and we found each other anyway. That's not luck. That's destiny telling curses to go to hell." He laughed and cried at once, pulled her close again, buried his face in her hair. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for saving me." She held him, this ancient creature who'd been made monster and fought his way back to humanity, and felt her heart expand with something too large for her chest to contain. The hunters came an hour later, 3 of them armed with stakes and silver, and the conviction of people who'd been taught that evil had clear borders and redemption was impossible. They kicked in the newly repaired door, surrounded the table where Elara and Lucian still sat holding hands. "Step away from it," the leader commanded Elara. He was young, perhaps 30, with the kind of righteousness that made negotiation impossible. "We're here to destroy the vampire. You're a victim. You'll be safe." Elara stood, placed herself between them and Lucian. The hunter frowned. "Move, now. We know what it is. We know what it's capable of." She shook her head, spread her arms wide, made herself a barrier. "She can't speak," Lucian said quietly from behind her. "She's mute, and she's not my victim. She's my salvation." "Vampires don't have salvation," another hunter spat. "Only destruction." "Let us test that theory," Lucian said, rising. "Your lore says vampires cannot enter holy ground, cannot touch blessed objects, cannot speak prayers or feel remorse. Watch." He moved past Elara, picked up the cross pendant she wore always, the one her grandmother had given her. It didn't burn him. He held it gently, reverently, then handed it back. "I have spent 500 years seeking redemption," he said. "I have killed, yes. I have fed on blood, yes. But I have also saved lives, hundreds of them. I've used my immortality to learn medicine, to fight plagues, to protect the vulnerable when I could. I am not blameless, but I am not the monster you were taught to see." "Lies," the leader said, but his conviction had wavered. Elara grabbed her phone, typed rapidly, turned the screen toward them. He's been cursed to lose his humanity, to fade into nothing. I broke that curse tonight with love and food and choice. If you kill him now, you're not destroying a monster. You're murdering someone who finally found his way back to the light. Curses can't be broken by cooking, the third hunter said, but she sounded uncertain. Magic is intention made real, Elara typed. I intended to save him. I intended to love him. And it worked. Test him. Let him touch your blessed weapons. Let him stand in your holy symbols. You'll see. The hunters exchanged looks. Finally, reluctantly, the leader drew a vial of holy water, uncorked it, and splashed it toward Lucian. It struck him, rolled down his shirt like ordinary water, didn't burn. That's not possible, the leader whispered. It's possible, Lucian said, because she made it possible, because love unmakes curses, because intention is stronger than damnation, because this woman, who has never spoken a word aloud, showed me how to be human again through the simple act of making soup with kindness. Silence fell across the dining room. Elara wrote, "Please, don't take this from us. Don't make his redemption meaningless. He's more than his worst moments. Isn't everyone?" The leader looked at her, at Lucian, at the table still holding the remains of their perfect meal. Something shifted in his expression, not quite acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of doubt. "We'll be watching," he said finally. "If you're wrong, if this is a trick, if anyone dies—" "They won't," Elara typed. "I promise you, no one will die by his hand ever again." "See that they don't," the leader gestured to his companions. "We're leaving, but this isn't over. Redemption isn't a single moment. It's a lifetime of choices." "I have several lifetimes to prove it," Lucian said quietly. They left. Elara and Lucien stood in the wreckage of their interrupted peace, holding each other, breathing. "That was close," he said. She nodded against his chest, then pulled back to write, "But we survived, and the curse is broken." "Is it? Completely?" "Try. Tell me what you sense." He closed his eyes, focused. "Everything. I sense everything. The scent of the candles, the texture of your hair, the taste of wine still on my tongue, and colors. Elara, the world is so colored. I'd forgotten. I'd completely forgotten what blue looked like, what gold looked like, what your eyes looked like, really looked like, not faded to gray." Tears tracked down her cheeks. She wrote, "Then it's done. You're free." "Not free," he corrected gently. "Still immortal, still vampire, still carrying 5 centuries of memory and mistake, but human too now. Human in the ways that matter. Because of you. Because of us," she corrected. "I couldn't have done it alone. You had to choose to be saved. You had to want it enough to keep fighting for 500 years. He kissed her again, longer this time, and she tasted wine and hope and the future spreading out before them like an undiscovered country. The restaurant reopened a week later. Elara cooked, Marcus served, regulars returned, and life resumed its ordinary magic. But 3 nights a week, after closing, she lit a candle in the window, and Lucian came. They cooked together now. He'd been a chef in 16th century Prague, he told her, before the world changed, and he'd had to reinvent himself. They traded techniques across centuries, her modern precision meeting his ancient intuition, creating dishes that would have made Magdalena weep if she'd had any capacity for beauty left. On the 6-month anniversary of their first meeting, Lucian made Elara breakfast at dawn, something he hadn't been able to do since his transformation. Eggs with herbs from her garden, bread he'd baked at midnight, coffee that made the apartment smell like possibility. She wrote on the napkin beside her plate, "What happens now?" "Now?" he smiled. "Now we live. I teach you piano. You teach me to appreciate modern music. We travel if you want. I can show you Prague, Vienna, all the places I've loved. Or we stay here, make this restaurant the best in the city, whatever you choose. What if I choose you? Just you for as long as we have. Then you'll have me until stars burn out, or you decide I'm insufficiently romantic, or I bore you with stories about the 17th century. Never," she wrote emphatically. "I'll never be bored. Promise me something." "Anything. Promise me you'll always let me cook for you. That this, us, food, intention, love, that it stays sacred." "I promise," he said solemnly. "Though I should warn you, I've become quite demanding about properly seasoned risotto." She threw a napkin at him, laughing silently, and he caught it with reflexes that were still impossibly fast, but no longer monstrous. Just a man. A very old man, yes, but a man nonetheless, who'd been loved back to life by someone who understood that the most powerful magic was simply choosing to care. They washed dishes together as morning light filled the kitchen, and Elara thought about curses and redemption and the strange paths that led two lonely souls to find each other across centuries and silence. She thought about her grandmother, who'd taught her that food was love made visible, and about Lucian's lost family, who'd loved him before he became something other. She thought about intention, about the choice to see humanity in unexpected places, about cooking as prayer, as spell, as the simplest and most profound form of saying, "I know you, I choose you, you are worth saving." Outside, the city woke to another ordinary day. Inside, a mute chef and a 500-year-old vampire made breakfast together, spoke in the language they'd created, him with words, her with gestures and written notes, and planned a future that shouldn't have been possible, but was. Because curses could be broken, because love was its own kind of magic, because sometimes salvation came in the form of soup made with intention, and someone brave enough to believe that monsters could learn to be human again, if only someone would teach them, patiently and with kindness, how to taste hope. And in that quiet kitchen, on that ordinary morning, redemption tasted like eggs with herbs and coffee and the promise of centuries yet to come.